you should take over and introduce
Sure.
Madam also.
Sure, sure. We'll start with Sri Omkaram.
Yes.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Our most humble pranams to the divine lotus feet of our dearest Swami. And by Swami's grace, we have a very eminent person amongst us here to be addressing the NLP team. To give a small introduction of Srimati Vasundhara Sinha, she belongs to the 1988 batch of the Indian Revenue Service. She has worked in various capacities with the Income Tax Department at Hyderabad, Guntur, Mumbai, New Delhi, and Patna in administration of income tax law and as an appellate authority and as an authorized representative of the government before the Income Tax Appellate Authority. She's worked in the Ministry of Commerce as Additional Director General of Foreign Trade, North Zone, New Delhi, where she was assigned with the implementation of the policy and schemes of export promotion of the Government of India. She has undergone training programs at Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, Maxwell School of Public Policy, Syracuse, and at Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University. At present, she is heading an E-vertical in the Income Tax Department in the rank of Principal Commissioner of Income Tax, Hyderabad. Her spouse, Sri Anjani Kumar, is the Commissioner of Police, Hyderabad. A hearty warm welcome to you, ma'am. Request you to please address our youth here. Ma'am, are you there?
I'm sorry, I had forgotten to switch on my mic. Thank you so much, Rati. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, ma'am.
Okay. So it's an honor for me to be here with you all today. I thank Dr. Gopi Krishna for inviting me. I thank all the other organizers for having me here. And I thank all of you who are assembled from wherever you are today to listen to me. Who do you think of when you think of a leader? Which is the first name that comes to your mind? Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Prime Minister Modi, Donald Trump? Okay, maybe you can strike that out. I'll come back to the relevance of this question a little later in my conversation with you today. To begin with, let me just speak a little about myself. In fact, that is all that I intend to do today, to speak about myself. I have racked my brains on what I should speak to you about, and I realize that I have no magic mantras to give to you today. No lectures on life, no lessons on leadership. You are all so accomplished yourself. It would probably be presumptuous on my part to teach you these things. All I'm going to do is to share some of the things that mattered to me, people and events that touched me and shaped me. I was born and brought up in Patna in Bihar. My school, it was a Christian missionary school, and the principal at the time was an old Irish nun, Sister Thekla. There must have been some 2,000 odd students in the school, and when the classes were not going on, the corridors and the playgrounds used to be buzzing with children, as can be expected. Noisy, boisterous children. And even if she walked from her office to the staff room, a short distance of about 100 meters, she would run into some 150 students. Obviously, each of these students used to greet her, as we had all been taught to do, and she would greet each one of them back individually. Not just an imperious nod of the head in the general direction of where the greeting was coming from, but answer each one of them. Good morning. Good morning, my dear. Very good morning. So she was constantly murmuring these greetings all the way. Now, why do I remember her to this day? Some 45 years later. Because she was a role model to me at that impressionable age. With that personal good morning, she made me feel special. She taught me that people matter. Each individual matters. None of us live in an abstract world. We are not automated beings devoid of emotion. In fact, it is emotions that bind us to each other, to our families, to our colleagues, to our teams, to our homes, to our work. And this was a big lesson for me. I was a sickly child in school. I was good in studies, if I may say so myself, but I had asthma, which meant that I could not participate in any sport and games because I don't know of any sport that does not involve physical exertion, running, sprinting, jumping. Yes, there are board games, but you know what I mean. So every day, while everybody else played in the PT class and in the lunch break and after school, I just sat and watched. And I learned a life lesson. Life is not fair. You can't have everything. But it's okay. You live with it. There are some things you can change, some you cannot. What you cannot, you just better live with it. Zoom forward a few years, I had passed standard 8. The school offered 3 streams for the school leaving exam. There was ICSE, there was the state matriculation board, in which again you could opt for either science or arts, as humanities was then called. For some logic, the best students of the batch were auto-allocated by the school to the ICSE section. And as I told you, I was a good student. So when I reached school for my first day in class 9, I found that I had been put in the ICSE section. My problem was that I was terrified of science. I loved maths. I could still manage biology, but for the life of me, I could not cope with physics and chemistry. And ICSE, as you all know, had a substantial component of science in the curriculum. I went home that day and told my parents, I cannot do this. So they said, what do you want to do? I'll study arts, I said. Fine, go talk to your principal tomorrow. And that was all there was to it. I should probably provide a little background to this. My grandfather was a professor of physics, my father a professor of engineering. My elder sister had followed in my grandfather's footsteps and studied physics. And here was I, an oddball. I look back and I realize the message that my parents sent me that day. that even in that little microcosm of society, all kinds of unique characters existed. Not everyone is the same. Everyone comes with their own strengths and weaknesses, and it is necessary to recognize it, to accept it, and to even encourage it. Zoom forward again. I joined the IRS, the Indian Revenue Service. Our training academy, the National Academy of Direct Taxes, was at Nagpur. One day, we found a small trident, a trishul, stuck into the ground right in front of the faculty building. There were a couple of rocks on the ground near it, smeared with kumkum, a few flowers strewn around it. Now remember, this is a Sarkari institute, avowedly secular. So it was obviously an incongruous sight. Our director at the time was Mr. T.Z. Mani, who used to have an open house every week where we had a free and frank interaction on anything that we wished to raise. I raised the appearance of this religious manifestation on government property at the next open house. Mr. Mani was taken aback. He had not seen it himself. But he said he will ascertain the facts and get back. The next week, at the next open house, he informed us that with all the greenery in the campus, including little pockets that had wild growth, there were a lot of snakes around. The gardening staff believed that the snakes, being a close companion of Lord Shiva, would be placated if they prayed to him, and they would leave the gardening staff alone while they worked in close proximity and would not bite them. He said he was convinced that we should respect their simple faith and beliefs. But he offered that if the house believed he was wrong, he would request them to remove it. Yes, for the record, the house agreed with him. Once again, I saw respect for diversity, the willingness to listen to and accept other people who may think differently from you. I also learned that communication is important. You need to talk to people, convince them, and when you do, people are reasonable. They listen to you. Zoom again to last year. A visually challenged staff was posted in my charge. He had been in the department for some 6-7 years. The person was also computer illiterate. He had never ever worked on a computer, though he did have some typing skills. I must add here that the income tax department is increasingly getting computerized, and it's very, very difficult to find adequate workload for any employee who is not conversant with our own application, leave alone someone who's not computer literate. Practically everything in the department is being done through the computer. So here was this guy, and I was unsure how and where I could utilize him. I asked him what he had been doing all these years. So he tells me that he had been assigned the job of taxpayer assistance. And what exactly did you do by way of taxpayer assistance? If some taxpayer comes to the office looking for some clarification, I refer him to the staff concerned. And how many such taxpayers came to him looking for clarification? Say in the last 1 month, 1 year? None. Zero. So I asked him, would you like to get computer training? He was silent for a while. Can I? I am blind. Well, so we went about locating an NGO which could conduct such training. My boss at the time happened to be a lady officer, Mrs. Rashmi Saxena Sahni, who was very appreciative of these efforts. As luck would have it, she was promoted and posted as the head of HR for the entire department shortly after this. Within a few months, she put together a formal, permanent scheme for training all visually impaired employees in the department so that any such employee anywhere in the country could be gainfully engaged and could attend office with dignity and pride. Lesson learned: it is impossible to predict where and how an opportunity may present itself. But opportunities to do something, to make a contribution, to make a difference, do present themselves. They do so in the most unanticipated ways and times, and then you just have to be ready to grab it. I will wind up with a story about my experience with a little problem in the office when I was posted in Patna. This was around 2002-2003. There had been a major reorganization in the department in 2001. The old units had been rejigged into new ones. In the process, there were a whole lot of records which, due to paucity of time, due to just pure laziness, could not be correctly transferred and handed over to the successor units. So as a shortcut, everyone put all their records into gunny bags, and the department had a vacant building, some 10,000 SFT. These were all dumped there. All these records were just simply dumped there. I joined as in charge of the administration sometime after all this happened. We needed the building for new office space. When I visited the building, it was horrible. There was a mountain of gunny bags filled with files all over the place. We could not even enter the hall. What to do? We could not simply throw the files away. They were important live records. So, as they say in the government, if you have a problem, you form a committee. And that's what I did. As the head of the administration, I was head of the committee. The heads of the 4 units in Patna were the other members, since It was, after all, their records. I asked them to nominate 3 to 4 staff from each of the units to open these gunny bags and make an inventory of the files. Initially, they were not too keen. Everyone has a manpower constraint, and who wants to spare the staff for a common cause for something which could take quite some time? But being head of administration, I bullied my way through. You do need to do that sometimes. You can't always rely on good sense to prevail. So these staff, they were drafted for a week. We, the committee members, visited the building from time to time to monitor the work. Progress was very, very slow. By the end of the week, hardly 10-15 gunny bags had been inventorized. But at the end of the week, all the staff turned up and said their week was over, that a new set should be nominated for the work for the next week. Some of the unit heads in the committee were also similarly inclined. I refused. My logic was that this was a difficult, thankless job. Each of these sets of staff would just bide their time and go back with no substantial progress in the work at all. I felt that we could end up still doing that same job for the next 1 year if we were to rotate the teams. So I insisted that the existing staff had to be told to stick on till they finished. Thankfully, the committee agreed. We then had a long talk with the staff. We explained what we needed and why they were being retained. We explained also that we were open to suggestions on how things could be made speedy, smooth, efficient, but the work had to be done. There were no two ways about it, and they alone were the ones to do it. Once we had done that, once we had made this clear, there were a whole lot of suggestions. They ranged from requests for simple things like a face mask to protect against the dust. Done. They pointed out that there was no facility for tea in the building or nearby. This building was a little inside the main road, and there were no tea stalls close to the building. So we arranged for tea to be delivered from the nearest tea stall twice a day. Every day, my staff would go to the tea stall, pick up the tea delivery boy with his flask of tea, and take him to the office building, then drop him back. Good measure, I arranged for evening snacks to go with the tea. Some pakora, some bhaji every day. Once in a while, we, the committee members, went and had samosas with them. The staff also suggested that we hire some manual labor to open the bags, to clean the dust from the files, and to carry the sorted files to their proper place on the racks. They suggested that we hire data entry operators so that our own staff could focus on identifying the kind of file it was, and arranging it together, making it ready for inventorizing, while the data entry operator could simultaneously enter the data. So we turned them into teams of 3 each team headed by our own staff member and assisted by 1 data entry operator and 1 manual laborer. They then devised the fields in which the data should be captured. They made suggestions about how the records should be arranged in the racks. The change, once they had taken ownership of the work, was dramatic. The entire work got over in about 4 to 5 weeks. When they came to hand over the printout and soft copy of the inventory, these same people who had grumbled and pulled long faces at the end of week 1 were grinning from ear to ear with pride. I look back at this experience with a lot of satisfaction. This whole activity was such an eye-opener for me. There was team building. There was teamwork and cooperation. There was ownership and commitment. There was hard work beyond the usual call of duty. There was initiative and innovation. There was application of mind. And what was my role in all this? I guess I was the Sutradhar. A Sutradhar is the guy in Indian theatre who holds the narrative together. I guess I provided the initial push, the perseverance and patience, even stubbornness, if you want to call it that. Believe me, after that first week, those guys had taken over. And I was happy to let them and to let go. They were doing a good job. They didn't need me, except, of course, for the logistical support. The leadership was truly dynamic. It was with me initially. It later passed between the various committee members and me, but it was firmly and undoubtedly with the rest of the team in the last phase. That's leadership for you. This brings me to the relevance of the topic that I chose for today, leaders and supermen. This brings me to the question I asked at the beginning. Who do you think of when you think of leaders? More often than not, the first people who come to mind are those who are either already in the history books or who would one day find their way into the history books. Mahatma Gandhi, father of the nation, he brought an empire to its knees. He led his country to independence. Abraham Lincoln abolished slavery against all odds. Martin Luther King Jr., face of the civil rights movement in the USA. Nelson Mandela, again brought independence to his country. Muhammad Yunus pioneered the concept of microcredit, microfinance. All these people are not just leaders. They are men with an aura, a halo. They are supermen. When we think of them, we think of an orbit far above us, something far beyond our reach. Who then is a leader? What is leadership? My honest answer is it is too complicated a question. Tomes and books have been written on this subject. I'm not erudite enough to answer it. My simple answer, if I were to attempt it, would be that a leader is someone who touches our lives and makes it better, who makes us better as a person, who makes us better at what we do, who helps us to achieve something that we want, who helps us even to realize what we should be wanting to achieve. So when I think of a leader, I think not only of Mahatma Gandhi and Abraham Lincoln, I also think of Sister Thekla back from school. She was and is a role model for me for the way she gave importance to every single individual. I think of my parents who taught me to accept myself as I am, who taught me to be accepting of diversity, of strengths and weaknesses, and to channel that. I think of Mr. T.Z. Mani, my director in the academy, who could be patient, who had the confidence to listen to 100-odd young probationary officers who were all educated, articulate, and had strong views of their own, and then could mold them to his view quietly and with logic, because that was the right way. I think of Mrs. Rashmi Saxena, who jumped in and put in place a policy for the training of the visually impaired, a gap that should have been filled long, long ago, but nobody had ever thought of it. I think of all those staff in Patna who took charge of the entire activity and who, at the end of the day, were instructing me, their senior. They were instructing me about how the work should be done. I think of all these people who have touched me and taught me something and made me a better person today. I also, with all the humility at my command, though with that gleeful and smug grin on my face, I may not look very humble at the moment, but with all the humility at my command, I also think of myself as a leader. Because I know I have made a difference on numerous occasions to numerous people in numerous tasks. Yet, I am acutely aware that I am not Superman. None of my actions have ever shaken the world. I have not eradicated poverty. I am not Muhammad Yunus. I have not brought independence to any country. I am not Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. I have not liberated any section of mankind from slavery. I am not Abraham Lincoln. I am not even known outside my little sphere, my very small sphere of acquaintances and friends. As I said, I am not Superman. But I don't have to be Superman to be a leader. Leadership does not have to be something stunningly extraordinary, something beyond our reach, something no one else could possibly do. Leadership can be our actions and our words in our day-to-day lives. Leadership is what I have done in my everyday affairs. What I have done is to touch a few people, to do that little bit that made life better for at least one person and to bring the best out of them. So, yes, I am a leader. And I believe that so are you all, each one of you. The very fact that you are all here shows that there is the spark in you. It is just a matter of whether you have identified it yet. I would like all of you to acknowledge that, because when you do, you also acknowledge your own potential. Your awareness makes it possible for you to use that potential in you. So go ahead, believe in yourself. Thank you and God bless.
Rocky, we
Open
can
to
go
questions, if any. Yes.
just right now.
Salam, everyone. Would request you all to kindly unmute yourself and ask your question, or you could probably send it on the WhatsApp group and we will read it out here. Because I believe a lot of you are not able to see the chat screen. If you're able to see it, please post your questions there as well.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'm Meenakshi from Navi Mumbai.
Yes, Meenakshi.
Could you give us some tips on how to maintain? Yes. Would it be possible for you to give us some tips and techniques on how to maintain a balance between your personal life, professional life, and your social life? As a woman, from a woman's perspective, especially.
Again, there are no magic mantras that I can give you. I can only talk about how I have done things. And I do acknowledge
So
that
can
there
you
is
please
no
share
one
some
size
experience?
fits all. Everyone goes through different circumstances. Everyone has different situations. Everyone has different facilities open to them. Uh, at this stage of life, of course, things are much more settled because my children are grown up. I have two sons. The elder one is 27, the younger is 25. They are both working. So there is no responsibilities as far as the children are concerned in that sense. I don't have to wake them up in the morning and pack their lunch and give them breakfast. There are occasions when you do have to take a few shortcuts. I'll recall one little incident when my son was young, school going, and one day he asks me that he would like to have chole bhature for his lunch. Now for me, making chole bhature was a complicated process. In my mind, it was too difficult to make early in the morning when there were so many other things to be done. And I must confess, I lied to him and I told him I don't know how to make chole bhature, but if you want, the next time we go out to eat, you can have chole bhature. He said, no, that's not quite what I am looking for. Fine, yes, next time we go, we'll have chole bhature. Great. But you know, my friend Bhavik, he gets lovely chole bhature for lunch. So he thought for a while and then he tells me, the next time you meet Bhavik's mother, you can ask her for the recipe. And I said, yes, I'll do that. Well, you do have to take a few shortcuts once in a while. Did I feel guilty about it? No. My very clear and categorical answer to that is no. There were a lot of things, there were a lot of times when I was not available for my children. The only thing I had assured them was that yes, if they needed anything, I was always there. But in practical terms, in logistical terms, it didn't always work out because yes, I would be in office. The reason why I didn't feel guilty about it, I have my mother to thank. My mother was a working woman, at least in my growing up years when I was in school. In the later years, she quit and became a homemaker. But in the initial years, my siblings and I used to go to school and we used to carry the key to the house around our neck tied on a ribbon. So school used to get over at 3 o'clock. We would come home, open the house, come inside, the food would be on the table, we would heat it if necessary, do our homework, go out to play, etc., etc. And then when my mother would come home, it was family time. I don't recall ever grudging the fact that my mother was not at home. The thing is that she was the only mother I knew. I had seen other mothers, yes, but as far as I was concerned, she was my only mother. There was no other mother to compare her with. I could not say that this mother of mine goes to office and does not take care of me, and this mother of mine sits at home and pampers me when I reach home and cuddles me. No, there was only one mother. All I knew was, did she love me? Yes, categorically, yes. So in my mind, when I became a mother and I was going out, in my mind, there was no conflict of this kind of my leaving my children at home and going out to work. So long as my love to them was unconditional, so long as I was taking care of their general needs, I was comfortable doing that. And that took care of a lot of these balancing of home and office is concerned. I must also add here that as you have been informed, my husband is in the Indian Police Service, and for a lot of time, he and I would not be posted at the same place. So he would be at another place. I would be mostly in Hyderabad with the children when they were in school. And to that extent, I was for a long period of time a single mother. So I think it helped that there was no other person with his own ideas of how the children should be brought up. It was entirely my lookout how things happened. Beyond that, yes, there is some balancing to be done. There is some time management to be done. There is some prioritizing to be done. You have 100 claims on your time. You should be attending an office party. You should be looking at your children's homework. You should be cooking for them. You should be doing so many 100 things. So at times, yes, you have to decide that this is more important at this particular point of time than that. So yes, you have to make your own adjustments. You have to find your own middle path. I'm not sure if that satisfies, I'm not sure if that's an adequate answer, but that's how it was for me.
Thank you so much for that, ma'am. We have a question from a brother here. He says, what are the possible ways to motivate your teammates or subordinates to take up any challenging job and do it enthusiastically?
I think the first requirement would be communication. They must understand what you are planning to do. They must understand uh, why you are doing it in a particular manner. So both the things should be clear to them. What is the goal and what is the path which is being chosen? And this communication must also be a two-way communication, in the sense that you may have, as the leader, as the boss, you may have decided that this is how it should be done, but your subordinates may have a suggestion which may be better than your way of thinking. So you should also be open to listening to them. So a two-way communication would be the first requirement. Unless you lay out to them exactly what you are thinking, it would be difficult to get that done on the ground, to get things going. So a clarity is required, and for that communication is important. The second, I think, would be empathy. Empathy to what they are doing, empathy in the sense of what their constraints are, and to recognize that, to provide for those constraints. It's not enough to just set impossible goals and say, look, this is what has to be done, just do it, I don't want to hear anything else. That doesn't get you the right response from them. They must have that confidence that you are going to listen to them and that you are going to adjust your way of thinking on the basis of what they are going through and how they are placed. So I think these two things would be important.
Saira ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a Sister Anita, please go ahead.
Saira ma'am, this is Anita from Orissa.
Yes.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask a question. You know, as women, we are constantly judged of our capabilities, and you know, we are always asked to give proof of the same by the society, whether at workplace or at place of education. What should be our mindset to be not affected of this constant judgment, and come out as a stronger epitome?
I come from a very, very privileged background, in the sense that as I told you, my grandfather was a professor of physics. Uh, so education has been an important part of my family. It was a given. It was a given that the women in the family would be as educated as the men. It was a given in the family that if they so choose, they would be career women. And in fact, every one of the women in my mother's generation was a working woman. So to that extent, I did not face this bias in my growing up years. As a student, I did not face this bias from my family or from my professors. I began to encounter this bias only after I started working. And there also, I think I have largely been lucky to not face this bias in very blatant terms. I remember one of my senior officers in Patna. There was a discussion going on about posting of officers, and his comment was so heartwarming. He said the majority of the officers I am being offered are women, and women by and large are very good workers, so I have no particular choice. You give any of them and I'll be happy because I know they will be good. So yes, I personally did not come across any such bias blatantly. But it's not as if the bias does not exist. It does exist. Two instances which happened with regard to my own subordinates. At one point of time when I was Commissioner Appeals, it's a very small unit, um, myself as the commissioner, and there are some 4 or 5 staff under me. So it's a very small unit which works. And it's just so happened in one particular year, all my subordinates were women. I'm sure it was not part of some grand plan, but it just so happened that all of them, all the staff who were posted under me, turned out to be women. And somebody, a male colleague, suggested to me that I should go and request the Chief Commissioner for a change, that I should go and request that at least one male staff should be posted under me. And I said, why? Well, it would be better, wouldn't it? And I said, excuse me, you're telling me? So wouldn't it be better if I were not posted anywhere at all? Being a woman, I wouldn't be able to do justice to the work. I practically laughed him out of the room. All these women who were posted with me were wonderful. There was absolutely no problem. But yes, that mindset sometimes does exist. How should we handle it? I think we should handle it with confidence. We should handle it with equanimity. We should handle it with poise. I think I am a good officer. I work hard. I do my best. I give no reason to anybody to point fingers at me, and therefore I have no reason to believe that anyone should point fingers at me. At least nobody has done so at my face, and if they do, I will give it back to them. There are various other biases also which work. Biases which do not necessarily come to you. The government of India, for example, gives, apart from maternity leave, there is something called child care leave, which is available to every woman with children until they are 18 years of age. And there are a lot of people who believe that this is so unfair And my answer to them is, yes, it is unfair. The men should also get childcare leave. The men should also be taking care of children. You need to handle these things. You need to take it in your stride. You need to at times just sort of shrug it off, brush it off, and let it pass. You should definitely not let it affect you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Let me add to this. I think this has a certain topicality because of that film Gunjan Saxena. Do women face discrimination? Probably. I don't know the facts about Gunjan Saxena, so I cannot comment on that. I can only comment on what I see around me, what I find. As a woman, I have had some very, very supporting colleagues. When I was carrying my children, when I was pregnant, and in the income tax department, we go on these searches. Sometimes the searches go on late into the night also. And at that time, there would always be somebody or the other who'd come and tell me, look, if and when you feel tired, just let me know. You can go lie down quietly for half an hour. I'll take over from you. So yes, there have been very supportive people also. When I came back from maternity leave, there were some people who told me, oh, you are back from holiday? And I had to say, excuse me, I was on maternity leave. I was not on holiday. There was also a senior officer, on the other hand, who said, oh, you're back? How long were you on leave? Sir, 6 months. I see, good. Good that you took time off to take care of your child. You know, bringing up a child is the biggest service that a woman can render to society. So I'm glad you took some time off. So you have both kinds of people. I'm sure there are both kinds everywhere. You would come across them. Cherish the ones who can cherish you. Ignore the ones who can't. It's their loss, not yours. Okay.
Thank you for that, ma'am. I think another sister had a question. Somebody was unmuting themselves. All right. In the meanwhile, I have a question from a brother, which I'd like to ask. Some people are set in their thinking and the way they function. They're not receptive to change, etc. How, as a leader, do you get them to your line when you have to get things done?
It's a very, very slow process. You just have to keep talking to them. Ultimately, communication does matter, and ultimately, it is the talking which makes them change. Unless it is their beliefs, as we discussed earlier, there may be some people who have a bias against women, and I find that no amount of talking really makes much of a difference to them. By now, we are all so set in our beliefs that it's very difficult to shake that. At the most, we may just nod our heads and just for the sake of it, say, yeah, fine, okay. But deep down, we may not agree. There are such people also. But if it's only a question of the work, if it's only a question of the way things are to be done in the office, it's talking which helps. This constant communication which helps. And Once again, it has to be a two-way communication. I should also be ready to listen to what he says. I should be ready to accept that maybe he's right and I'm the one who's wrong. That is the only way which has worked for me.
Thank you, ma'am. There's another question from a brother. If sometimes there's a miscommunication or error of judgment within a team, which leads to sudden change in the team environment, knowing that neither had ill feeling, should we wait for dust to settle and things go right, or do we take an action immediately to avoid further damage?
It would depend on the situation. I think it's difficult to give a one size fits all solution to this. There could be different situations. Um, Differences between teammates on account of miscommunication or a communication gap would perhaps be best dealt with at the earliest before it becomes aggravated and people get set in their notions. So it would be best to tackle that at the initial stage. But I suppose there could be situations where it wouldn't be like that. Most of the time I find that if I call the warring factions, so to say, uh, and talk to them separately together, trying to find middle ground, trying to work out a rapprochement, it works. So yeah, I think talking helps, dialogue helps, communication helps.
Sure. Thank you for that, ma'am. There's another question from a brother who asks, what tools help you in planning projects and other office tasks? What motivates you to remain enthusiastic?
What motivates me to remain enthusiastic? I think it is job satisfaction. If you enjoy your work, you will do it. If you don't enjoy your work, you will not find the energy, the motivation, the enthusiasm for it. I think it is the same whether it's work or family or friends. That's something that you love. You like doing things for your family and therefore you do it. You like getting together with friends, you like doing things for them, and that's why you do it. And it's the same thing. You like doing your work and therefore you do it. There is no substitute for that. If you love your work, you will put in more work. As for how do I plan my work, I am a very detailed planner basically. I am a list person. At any given point of time, I have these various lists being prepared and written down somewhere or the other, now mostly on the mobile. It helps me to bring coherence to my ideas and thoughts. It helps me to organize myself and to know exactly how I want to proceed in my work, what are the things that I want to do. I dare say that this is not the only way to organize things. There are people who I feel are very scattered all the time and yet they do deliver, they are very successful. So it all depends on your individual style, yes. This is how I do things. I by birth sign, I'm a Virgo, and my friends keep telling me that the way I work is very typical of a Virgo. I'm very organized. I'm a fanatic about being organized. Everything has to be just so. So before I do something, there are 1,000 things that I write down in my list. I write down a lot of things in my lists. That's how I do things. And whatever I do because I love it. I do enjoy my work.
That was simply wonderful, ma'am. I've exhausted all the questions that I got. In case anyone else has anything, please unmute yourself. Otherwise, I think I'll hand it over to Gopi uncle to close today's session.
Good evening, ma'am. This is Gayatri Krishnamurthy. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. It's been really a learning process for all of us. So the question that I had was, how should we deal with situations when our senior may not give us enough autonomy or give us that space to, operate in a decentralized fashion, and which seems to kind of curb our creativity so how do we kind of operate against all these constraints and kind of maximize our output?
May I ask, where do you work? What kind of organization do you work in?
So the point is, this is not related to the organization where I work, but I've been typically encountering this situation elsewhere, where
Okay.
the processes and the protocols have been sort of so many, and at times you do feel that you're losing your autonomy or creativity. So this question was not related exactly to my workspace.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason why I asked was I just wanted to get a perspective of what could be your situations. You talk of autonomy. There couldn't be a place where there is less autonomy in certain respects as in the government. Everything that we do, the manner in which we work is set down in terms of rules and procedures. That is a given. Now, what can you do within those boundaries is where your creativity comes in. Within the income tax department, for example, where I work strictly within the boundaries of the Income Tax Act. I administer the Income Tax Act, and whatever I do has to be absolutely in compliance with that. I cannot transgress its boundaries. Within that, there is freedom to work. At a different level, there are certain targets which are set for us. The ultimate aim, the raison d'etre of the income tax department is to collect revenue. So every year the government sets targets that this much of taxes ought to be collected. There are also various other targets. These many assessments must be completed. These many surveys must be done. These many penalties, prosecutions, and so on. A whole lot of other targets are set. And what I can do is only within the broad parameters of those targets. I cannot set the targets. I cannot say that, no, I'll not collect 1,000 crores. I'll collect just 100 crores. How do I go about doing that job is again bounded by the Income Tax Act. But within that, how to organize my work, how to prioritize my work, that is left to me. So I think we should accept the boundaries that are set. Sometimes those boundaries cannot be changed. Even for my boss to change those boundaries would be difficult because he is also governed by those same boundaries. But within that, I need to find ways and means. There is one vertical in the income tax department, for example, which is tax deduction at source. And how I go about doing my work, how somebody who's posted in TDS could go about doing that work. He could do surveys, he could do inspections, he could sit in office and examine the records and do that. So within those parameters, there are certain things that you can innovate on. At present, the income tax department is collecting a lot of information, financial information from various sources, collating them, and then using that to collect revenue. But before these things had got institutionalized, a lot of officers were doing these things on their own initiative because this is permitted under the law. There was no target set, there was no guidelines that this is something that you have to go and collect, but officers did go and collect this information from the various sources on their own initiative and then used it to collect revenue, to send notices to those assessee and saying that, look, you have made investments, where is the source of income? So this was their own initiative, their own creativity in which they did it. So within those parameters, we need to find them. Let us not think of those boundaries as prison walls. These are probably boundaries which have been set because they are required. Let us look at it that way, make the most of it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Saira ma'am, this is Nitesh from Himachal. As you spoke that sometimes you have to fully get the work done, how can this kind of quality be developed? Like being a bit of aggressive and verbose about the work that we are doing, especially in the government sector, where we see that a soft nature does not get done. So how can we develop that kind of tactical thinking now?
Are you married? Do you have children?
Not right now, ma'am.
Okay, but you were a child once.
Right.
Okay. When my kids were young and when they had become a little old enough to do things on their own, I would make them pack their school bag. I would make them arrange their uniform for the next day. It was a tough job. It was a tough job because it would take far longer than if I had done the work myself. They would be goofing around, they would be playing, they would be jumping here and there, and I would have to stand there, bring them back again to the task at hand. What's the next period? Which is the subject? Have you put your book? Have you put your notebook? And keep on doing that. But this was a balance of a smile and some display of anger, not really anger, but a display of anger, a display of annoyance. I had to show to them that yes, what they are doing is not to my liking and that I would like them to do it quickly, not take so long over it. So it's a balance which you have to strike. Over a period of time, your subordinates also judge you. They also form an opinion about you. I believe that by and large, everybody wants to work well. And it is for me as a boss to encourage that. So most of the time, I would prefer not to be annoyed at them or be angry at them. Most of the time, I would prefer to get work out of them with a smile. But I do need to be serious at times when I find that people are not taking things seriously. One has to judge if a work is not getting done, why is it not getting done? Is it because that person has been complacent and casual? Or is it because there were genuine constraints? If there are genuine constraints, then yes, that is something that it is incumbent upon me as a boss to appreciate, and if it is within my powers, to find a solution for it. But if it is merely because the person was casual or just not bothered about it, then yes, this is something which would require me to show my displeasure, to take action against him if necessary. So that is something which would have to be analyzed and seen, and on that basis I would do it. And I think it is no different from the way you would handle people at home, your family, your children, and the people in the office.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Sairam, ma'am.
Sairam.
Saira?
Yeah, ma'am, this is Arjun from Kerala.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Ma'am, how do you deal a situation when there are two leaders in a team and you are one of the leaders? So, like, is my voice audible now?
I did not understand the question. How would there be, is it a situation where there is no clear hierarchy?
No, yeah, something like that. It's not a hierarchy. It's not one person deciding thing. In your case, you have the power of deciding things. Suppose there are multiple people deciding, and you are in that situation, and all these people are making the decision factors have their own way of working out things. So how do you deal that situation?
I'll give you a very, very peculiar answer to that. I don't know whether it's an appropriate answer. My mother-in-law stays with me for substantial periods of time at home. When she's not there, then I'm the boss at home. I decide what happens, what doesn't happen. The kitchen is my domain. When she is here, then obviously she also has a say, right? So there has to be a little give and take. There are situations where I go and tell the maid something, and then she comes and tells her something else. I give in to her because she's my senior in age and in status. Sometimes I do not agree with her instructions, and then I don't question the maid. I go back and talk to her. I had told the maid this, you told the maid that. Do you think we can do this? Something third, or maybe I explain to her, why did I give that instruction? Can we go back to my instruction, please? I presume that the situation that you are asking about is something similar. So there has to be some give and take. There are some things in which he may be right, some things in which if he is right, then yes, you can give in to him. There are some things in which you believe that yes, you are absolutely right, and then maybe you can go discuss with him. And I do believe that talking to people does help. It's one of the most underrated mechanisms of getting along in office. If you talk to people, it does help. If he still does not agree, then probably I would go to my boss and say that there is a stalemate, please resolve it. But most of the time, I believe that it would be possible to resolve through some kind of coordination and cooperation with the other persons in your team who may be holding a position similar to yours, and may also be in a leadership position along with you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. I think I got the answer. Like, communication is very important.
Yes.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank
I
you, ma'am.
think there was another sister who had a question.
Hello, ma'am. Good evening. Am I audible?
Good evening. Yes, please go ahead.
Ma'am, this is Meenakshi from Jharkhand.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, my question to you is like that there are so many places where the AO can function only with the prior permission of PCIT or CIT. And I'm sure in your entire career, there must have been SSEs or their representatives who have tried to turn the case around by showing you money power or muscle power. So, how did you ensure that that is not taking place in your department, and also you do not you do not cultivate a bitter kind of a relationship with the other subordinates, because they will say ye khati nahi hai na khane deti hai. So without happening that, how did you ensure that everything went on smoothly and everything was right and legal and lawful?
My first encounter with offers of this kind was very early on, and one of the CAs who was representing before me gave a hint that the exact words he used was, the assessee is very cooperative. And I was quite naive, stupid, and I said, fine, good. So ask him to give all the information. So he repeated again, ma'am, the assessee is very cooperative. And I still didn't understand. And this went on for 2 or 3 times. And then the guy must have realized that this woman is stupid and stopped. I happened to mention this to one of my colleagues. I said there was this very silly CA who had come and he kept repeating that the assessee is very cooperative. And he said, you idiot, he was offering you money. I thought, oh my God. There have been people subsequently who have offered, and no, it has not caused me bitterness. It has not caused me any animosity towards that person. I have just said whatever I had to say. As far as my subordinates are concerned, there are things that are in my control, and I try to exercise that control to the best of my ability. While saying that, I am also aware of my constraints. I am not in a position to revolutionize the world. I cannot change everyone around me. To the extent possible, yes, I will. If it causes bitterness in them, that's their problem. I do not see how it concerns me. What is my job? I will do my job. I will do it the way I see fit. And it's not for my subordinate to tell me what I should or should not do. So I leave it at that. I recognize my constraints, and within those constraints, I do what I need to do.
Saram ma'am, it's me Shucheta Chakravarti from
Yes,
Jharkhand.
please.
I would
Yes,
like to
please.
ask you that how do we deal with positively with people around us when they have a negative attitude toward us?
Uh, I presume that you are referring to a negative attitude which may not have a basis. If that is
Yes.
so, through my words, through my action, through my behavior, I hope I will hope and presume that I am able to convince him over a period of time that there is no basis for his negative attitude or his bias. If that doesn't happen, then I think I would just ignore him. I think there is nothing that can be done about it. I will tell you a little incident which happened. A steno was posted under me, a lady. And when the posting orders came, one of my other staff came to me and said, "Ma'am, please speak to the chief commissioner and get her changed. It would be better to get her changed." So I said, "Why?" "Because she is physically challenged." So I said, "As in, what exactly is the problem?" "So she suffers from polio." I said, "She's a steno and I presume she doesn't type with her feet." So he left it at that. This lady was one of the best stenos that I have ever had. She gave me a really tough time because by the time, in order to give dictations, you need to be prepared yourself. You need to read the file, you need to analyze the facts, and then you give a dictation. I would give her a dictation and I would tell myself, okay, now I can sit and read my files. And she comes back in next to no time and says, "Done, madam." So she was that fast. She would not give me time to do my own study and analysis. And after a few months, I asked the staff who had suggested that I should get her changed. I asked the staff, "Do you agree that she's a good worker?" And he said, "Yes, ma'am." I think a lot of negativity and biases may arise from a lack of awareness. People don't know you. People may have just heard things from here and there and may have formed an opinion which may not be based on facts. And once they are aware of the facts, they may revise their opinion. I would like to believe that that is how it works.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I think that's about it. Thank you. Yes, Gopi, uncle, over to you.
Sairam, and that was a wonderful session, madam. It was so practical, and I think of the last few sessions that we had as a guest speaker, I think this is one session that we had where we had a lot of practical learning. And as I was watching you speak, I could see that every thought that was coming out was right from your heart with a lot of thought process. I knew that you were not talking off your head, and it was with a lot of experience and concern that these young children are asking you. I'm sure that this personal experiences and examples of your own life will, I'm sure that these kids will learn the kind of patience, perseverance, and purity with which you have been working in the department and in your life all through your life. The balance of life. When the question came up, I was wondering how would you answer it, because I definitely knew that since your husband is in the police service, you would be posted in different places, and you came out very aptly saying that the control stays with you and you had managed the house pretty well. And I think, there are a lot of would-be mothers and would-be fathers here. Maybe down the line, about 4 or 5 years, I'm sure all these youngsters will get married. And you have given a lot of insight of how one should lead life, despite being in different positions in your personal life. How do you manage your life and balance your life is something that's come out really well. Well, you were all through very composed, and that smile actually is very. I should say it's an addiction. If that smile is around there, I think that is what really helps. And I was really happy when you spoke about the last part of it, the negative attitude. In fact, I had posed the same question to Swami, whom we call Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. I had posed the personal question to him similarly, and he answered in the same way. He said, you do the way, you live the way you have to be, and you present yourself the way you should do, and let them learn from it. That is what he said, and I think you were very apt in saying that. Finally, the question of the mother-in-law and the transfer of power is something very, very apt. I think all the kids must have got a very, very valid point there. Somewhere you have to bend. You need not crawl in life, but you can definitely bend. And ego is something that really spoils, relationships. And the conflict of interest comes only when you have the ego coming in, and the resolution happens only when you actually bend down and one gives in and the other accepts it. All said and done, this was a great session for us, and thank you for coming on board. I think I should also thank my brother for proposing your name to be here with us. I think we'll be bothering you also in the years to come. We'll have more sessions like this with more youth coming in. And thank you very much for being with us. And we now pray to Bhagwan to bless you and your family with Lord, His grace and love. Thank you very much. Rati, you can close it right now, Rati.
Just before you close, my thanks once again to you. And I must appreciate the kind of questions that came my way. And they challenged me to think before I answer. Thank you all so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll end with Shanti Mantram and Samasta Loka.
Right.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Samastalokaah Sukhino Bhavantu. Samastalokaah Sukhino Bhavantu. Samastalokaah Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. जय बोलो भगवान श्री सत्य साई बाबा जी की जय.
Jai.
Thank you and Sai Ram.
Thank you, Sai Ram.
Thank you.